So last night was the BAFTAs, and at it was someone by the name of John Davidson, someone with Tourette's, who is in fact there to celebrate a film about their Tourette's called I Swear, a film that documents their own experience with Tourette's, and specifically coprolalia. Coprolalia being the official term for when someone with Tourette's says the most offensive, taboo, or socially inappropriate things in a setting. That's what obviously we're talking about here. And in an incredibly unfortunate moment for all involved, an incident happened where Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo were on stage to give an award, and John Davidson's tick fired and he said the N-word. Now, obviously, this is an incredibly unfortunate thing for all involved, and I applaud both Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo in their handling of it and just basically, carrying on the show unfazed. I can't imagine how hard it would be to basically carry on after hearing that. But it showed a level of understanding that I wish the rest of the internet showed, frankly. Because when I tell you that some of the responses to this have been insane, I mean it. Now, for full transparency, I am not someone with Tourette's. I know people who have Tourette's. I do have a disability myself. It is not the same thing as this though, but some of the same things apply. Obviously, I have cerebral palsy. And one of the things that people seem to really not be understanding about Tourette's in general is that it is literally involuntary, meaning that they literally have no control over what is said here. And in any given situation, they can just blurt out what would be the worst thing to possibly say in any given scenario. The reason I bring up my own disability in this case is because what I have is cerebral palsy. And what I can tell you is that occasionally my muscles will just involuntarily spasm, which obviously sometimes will make people, uncomfortable. The point I'm making with that though is, like with Tourette's, it's entirely involuntary. The same principle applies. And I'm seeing so many people say, oh, well, why would it be a slur that he says involuntarily? Not realizing that the very definition of the thing he has means he will say the worst thing to possibly say in that situation. So this happened, and then it obviously caused a massive uproar on social media, particularly on Twitter. And I have to say, as a disabled person, I'm deeply, deeply horrified by, the way that this is being treated by quote-unquote progressive spaces. Basically, there have been a number of people on social media basically saying, if he can't control himself, he should just stay at home. He should just stay inside. I saw someone saying he should be locked up. Another saying he should be muzzled. And then when you call out that this is obvious ableism, people will cry foul. And I just found it insane, the lack of education that goes on around disabilities and Tourette's specifically. And I saw a number of people saying, well, even if it's involuntary, it doesn't undo the harm of that word. And I understand that. I am not here to police how black people feel about the N-word as a word. But surely the fact that it's an involuntary tick does change the context of someone saying it. I'm not saying that it's wrong to feel uncomfortable with someone saying it. I'm saying that given the context, can we really ascribe negative intent on someone who literally cannot control it? Because I've seen people saying things like, oh, well, he would have secretly been thinking it, or he's secretly racist, and there's no way of proving that at all. There's no evidence to justify that at all. Another point I want to touch on is just that I've seen a ton of people saying, why is it even in his vocabulary? Why does he even know what the word means? Which feels incredibly infantilizing of the guy, because of course he knows what it means. Of course he's heard the word. Of course he's aware of it, and it's in his vocabulary, because everyone is aware of it, and it's in his vocabulary. And the fact that he said it is indicative of the fact that he knows the weight behind the word, because people with Tourette's say the thing that is least opportune to say at any given opportunity. And of course, saying that when two black performers are on stage naturally is the worst thing you could possibly say in that scenario, which is why he said it. But to say that, like, oh, it shouldn't even occur to him, or, you know, why does he even know what that word means? He's an adult in the modern day. You hear that word around, whether it's in songs, whether it's in conversation, whether it's, you know, in the context of being reclaimed. You hear that word, you're going to hear that word, so I reject that as well. In fact, I'm going to play a TikTok from a black person with Tourette's, so much more qualified than me, and they're going to say literally what I've just said to you now.
This is part 2 to my last post about the entire BAFTA situation. I am seeing a ton of people saying, oh my god, during Black History Month? Tourette syndrome is not based on a month. Offensive tics are going to happen no matter what a person does. I'm black. Oh my goodness. And I also have the N-word as a tic. I have other slurs as tics. Does this mean that I use them regularly? Does this mean that I mean them? Does this mean that I can control what I say? No, it does not. That's not how coprolalia works. That is not how Tourette syndrome works. Quite literally the Sweet Anita situation all over again. Shut up. Where she ended up saying the N-word on stream. She got canceled for it, got called racist, etc. We need to do better. I've seen so many people say, that we can control our tics. That's not, if you can control a tic, it's not a tic.
And I saw this tweet, and it really got to me, where it was like, oh, well, we have to accommodate their disability, but why can't they accommodate their anti-blackness? And like, look, I get it. Racism is a real terrible issue in this world. But the difference is he literally cannot control it. He literally could not control it. You can control whether you spout ignorant nonsense about disabilities you don't understand. You can control that. He can't. And I just find it amazing that in progressive spaces, you've got people advocating for the segregation of disabled people from society, but wokely, I guess. Basically arguing for the exact same thing that they would claim to be against if it was against any other minority group. And I find it so frustrating that whenever a bit of discourse happens surrounding a disability online, you know, whenever there is something like Tourette's or something like it that happens in a public setting, everyone all of a sudden becomes disability experts. Everyone all of a sudden who you've never seen talk about disability or disability activism suddenly thinks they can have a take on any given particular issue with regards to disability. I am so sick to death of disability being treated as the one that's just cool to make fun of. It's the one that's cool to be bigoted against. Because yes, by saying that they should be ostracized from society, by saying they should have just stayed at home, by saying that they should be sat at the back, that is ableist. And if you think like that, I implore you to just take that logical fallacy a bit further in your mind. Where is that line drawn? There might be certain physical disfigurements that make children uncomfortable or scared in public settings. Does that mean that they should just not be allowed outside? Where do we draw the line here? Because I think that we're going down an incredibly slippery slope. I do want to make one thing clear though. This was an incredibly unfortunate situation for all involved. And as I said, I applaud Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo in their handling of this. But there is one party who I will fully ascribe blame to. Ultimately, these are three men who were in an incredibly awkward situation, an incredibly difficult situation, but none of them are necessarily at fault in this case. You know who I do ascribe blame to? The BBC. Because this wasn't live. This was pre-recorded. Why wouldn't you just edit this out? Especially because we know they edited out someone in the same event saying Free Palestine. So that was okay to edit out, but not this. It's an incredibly poor oversight from the BBC, and I hope that they give all three men an apology. That's one of the other things that I've been seeing people say is that, oh, well, Tourette's doesn't stop you from apologizing. And I'm sure maybe that, like, they have spoken privately since this event, we don't know. But it is also important to acknowledge that Tourette's is worse in high-pressure situations. For example, being confronted by a tic, which you cannot control. So there is every possibility that in trying to apologize, it could happen again. I'm not saying that couldn't mean that they could do a written apology. Again, we don't know. For all we know, they may have apologized backstage. But I also think it's important to acknowledge as well that whilst I understand where the calls for an apology are coming from, and again, I'm not going to tell black people to not be uncomfortable by the word, if a disabled person is constantly forced to apologize for things they cannot control, then ultimately what you're basically doing is shaming them for their own existence at that point. And I don't think that's good either. Ultimately, this was just an incredibly unfortunate situation for all involved, one that the BBC and BAFTA could have 100%, edited around or done better with, but one that's ultimately not the fault of either the guy with Tourette's or the two people on stage, who I think handled themselves very, very well. That's all I have to say. If you did enjoy this video, I mean, it's not really much of an enjoyable video, but it is a video that I felt I needed to make. It's something that was on my mind all night after it happened. Then be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you later.